Eli Hart stood by his corral fence, staring at his herd of 18 thin cattle. The animals milled in the dust, bones showing through hide, a mirror of his dying dream. His ranch, Hart's Draw, was little more than a cabin, a corral, and hope running dry. But it was his, every splinter, every crack, every piece of it. The problem was, he was about to lose it. He needed one last cattle drive to Cheyenne, one last chance to pay the bank before they took his land. The odds were long, and failure meant he'd become just another drifter, swallowed by the same dust that now clawed at his eyes. Eli left the corral and walked into town. Sagebrush Ford was a single street of weary wooden buildings, huddled against the emptiness of Wyoming. A crooked sign for Pike's General Mercantile creaked in the wind like a tired sigh. Inside, the air was thick with coffee beans, leather, and disapproval. Agnes Pike stood behind the counter, arms crossed, her face set like a granite ledge. "You're a fool, Eli Hart," she said, without even a greeting. "Afternoon, Agnes." Eli replied, tipping his hat. "Just need to settle up for the supplies," she snorted. "Settle up? You mean more promises?" Eli tried to smile. "Something like that." Agnes's sharp eyes flicked to the young man standing near the shelves, a red-faced boy named Tommy Birch. "You think a trail boss, a cook, and 3 hands are enough to move that herd? And one of them can't even grow a beard." Tommy's ears burned. "I can ride as good as any man, Mrs. Pike," he said quietly. From the back, the blacksmith, Hector Ruiz, grunted as he lifted a sack of flour onto his shoulder. "The boy's got heart," he said, "and I can shoe a horse in a dust storm. We'll manage." Agnes shook her head. "It's not the work I'm worried about, it's the food. You can't drive men for 2 months on hardtack and bad coffee. You need a real cook." Eli sighed. "And where am I supposed to find one? The good ones are already hired, and the rest would poison the crew." Agnes hesitated, tapping her finger on the counter. "There's a woman over in Dry Willow, Maeve Orr, Irish. They say she can make a feast out of beans and salt pork." Eli raised an eyebrow. "And the catch," Agnes leaned in, "she's trouble. Got thrown out of a hotel in Cheyenne for her temper. Quick with her tongue, and quicker with whatever's in her hand. Skillet, bottle, knife. Take your pick." Tommy's eyes widened. Hector paused, thoughtful. "A woman on a cattle drive," he muttered. "That's unusual." "It's bad luck," Tommy added quickly. Eli gave a small smirk. "Only bad luck if she can't cook." Agnes sighed again. "You don't know what you're doing, Eli." "I know I'm out of options," he said, turning toward the door. The bell chimed as he left, stepping back into the blinding sun. By nightfall, word of his plan had spread through the Larkspur Saloon like wildfire. Men talked in low voices over whiskey glasses. Eli Hart's hiring a woman cook, the Irish one from Dry Willow. "She's got a knife and a temper." He's desperate. Eli ignored them, nursing his drink at the corner table. He'd been the talk of the town before, ever since he'd come back from his time with the cavalry. Not as a decorated soldier, but as a man carrying a quiet shame. They didn't know the truth, the order he refused, the choice that ruined his name. They just saw a rancher with nothing left to lose. He didn't notice the stranger watching him from the shadows. The man's clothes were finer, his pistol new and gleaming. His name was Vance Calder, and his business was power. He controlled the water crossings up north, though no law said so. And now, Eli Hart's desperate plan had crossed his path. Calder smiled faintly, his eyes cold. A desperate man was a predictable man, and a predictable man was easy to destroy. The next morning, Eli saddled his horse and rode for Dry Willow. The land stretched empty and sunburnt, every mile tasting of dust and silence. By noon, he found the Galloway house. The 2-story inn sagged under the sun's weight, paint peeling like old parchment. Inside, heat shimmered above a busy kitchen. And there she was, Maeve Orr. Her red hair burned like copper in the light. Stray strands clung to her freckled face as she stirred a pot with one hand and sliced onions with the other. Her movements were fast, sure, like someone who'd learned long ago that hesitation invited trouble. A burly customer leaned in close beside her, grinning. "Smells good, sweetheart. Almost as good as you," quote. Without looking up, Maeve shifted her weight. The skillet in her hand moved in a short, sharp arc and cracked against the man's hand before it could land on her waist. "The food is for paying customers," she said evenly. "I'm not on the menu." The man yelped and backed away. Maeve didn't even glance at him. Eli had seen gunfights start over less. But this wasn't rage. It was control. She knew exactly how to defend herself without wasting a breath. He stepped forward. Miss Orr, she turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Her green eyes studied him in one swift glance. If you're here to complain about the stew, take a number. No, ma'am, Eli said, meeting her gaze. I'm here to offer you a job. He explained everything. The drive, the pay, the risks. When he finished, she folded her arms. Small crew, desperate man, long odds. She said flatly, why should I leave this kitchen for one on wheels? Because out there, Eli said quietly, you'll only have to deal with storms and sky, not men who forget how to behave. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. There are conditions. My pay is mine. My rations are mine to manage. I sleep separate. And if any man lays a hand on me, he's gone. No excuses. Quote, as clear as mountain water, Eli replied, when can you start? 2 days later, the stagecoach brought her to Hart's Draw. She carried one carpet bag, one skillet, and a look that dared anyone to question her. By sunset, she had transformed Eli's sorry excuse for a camp kitchen into a place that smelled like hope. Beans, onions, and something that reminded them all of home. That night, as the crew ate her stew in silence, Lou Tate, a wiry, sunburned cowboy, spoke up. Never thought I'd see the day. He said, a woman runnin', a chuck fire. Ain't natural. Maeve didn't look up. A man's job is to ride, mine's to cook. If you don't like it, make your own supper. Lou started to rise, but Eli's calm voice stopped him cold. Sit down, Lou. Miss Orr runs the fire. Her word here is law. You can ride out if you don't like it. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Then Lou sat. The line had been drawn. And for the first time in months, as the stars rose over the plains, Eli Hart felt something flicker in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The days that followed settled into a steady rhythm. The herd moved north, slow and stubborn under the wide Wyoming sky. The sun baked the earth until it cracked, and the wind carried the taste of dust and distance. Maeve's cooking became the only thing that broke the monotony. The smell of her stew at sundown, the strong coffee that kept them all standing through sleepless nights. Even Lou Tate, who had grumbled the loudest, stopped complaining when he realized her food made the difference between misery and strength. But though the camp began to find its rhythm, the land was unforgiving. Water was scarce, and so was luck. Every day stretched out like an endless road to nowhere. By the 8th day, Maeve rode beside Eli to scout ahead. The air was still. Too still. The horizon shimmered in the heat. Then, out of the west, clouds rose like black mountains. Storm's coming, Eli said. Maeve squinted toward the sky. I can feel it. The air's gone heavy. Moments later, the wind turned cold. The temperature dropped fast, and then came the low, distant rumble, a roar that grew until it sounded like the earth itself was breaking apart. Hail! Eli shouted, ride! They kicked their horses hard, racing for shelter. On the horizon, a dark shape broke the flatness of the land. A small wooden shack, half hidden in the grass. They reached it just as the first hailstones slammed into the ground like thrown stones. Inside, the shack was small and smelled of dust and old wood. They barely had time to close the door before the storm hit in full. The hail pounded the tin roof so hard, it sounded like 1,000 drums. The horses snorted and stamped, trembling in fear. Eli calmed them with quiet words. Maeve stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the storm turn the world outside into a white fury. When it was over, silence returned like a stranger at the door, slow and uncertain. The air inside had grown cold. Eli found a few scraps of old firewood, and soon a small flame flickered in the rusty stove. The orange light touched their faces, chasing away the chill. Maeve rubbed her hands before the fire. Eli stared into the flames, his expression far away. You've seen worse storms than this, she said softly. He didn't look at her. The ones men make are worse. She didn't speak. She waited, the quiet between them deep and patient. I was a cavalry scout, Eli said finally. His voice was low, the words heavy. We were ordered to destroy a Cheyenne camp. They said it was a war party, but it wasn't. It was families. Women, children. I refused the order. We stopped some of it, not enough. Too many died. He paused, staring at his hands. They court-martialed me, called me a coward, said I was lucky they didn't hang me. But I see their faces every night, the ones we couldn't save. The fire crackled. The silence afterward was full of ghosts. Maeve looked at him, not with pity, but understanding. "I grew up in Boston," she said quietly. "We were Irish. That was enough to make you dirt in the eyes of most folks. I learned early that if I didn't fight, I'd get trampled. I learned that if a man pushed me, I'd better have a skillet ready." She smiled faintly, the firelight catching her freckles. "They call me dangerous, but all I ever wanted was a fair chance to breathe." For a while, neither of them spoke. The storm outside eased into gentle rain, and the small shack became a world of its own. Two people who had both refused to bend, standing in the ruins of what that refusal had cost. When the clouds finally broke, they rode back to camp. The ground sparkled with melting ice, the air fresh and sharp. But their peace didn't last. Jeb Crow, their quiet marksman, met them at the corral. "Eli," he said grimly, "we've had visitors." Quote, he led them to one of the cows. Its ear had been cut, carved in a jagged V-shape. Eli froze. He knew that mark. "Everyone in the Powder River country did Calder's sign," Hector said, his voice like a growl. Vance Calder, the cattle baron, who owned half the water in Wyoming and claimed the rest by force. The man Eli had unknowingly crossed. That night, no one slept easy. The men cleaned their rifles. Maeve brewed coffee that no one tasted. Every shadow looked like danger. At dawn, they reached Cottonwood Creek, the only reliable water for 50 miles. The herd needed it. But when they came to the narrow wooden bridge that crossed it, they saw riders waiting on the far side. A dozen of them, and in the middle sat Vance Calder. He was dressed like a man who owned the world, a black coat, polished boots, a new Colt on his hip. His eyes were the color of cold iron. Eli rode forward alone, his voice calm. "We're just passing through, Calder." "Don't want trouble," Calder smiled thinly. "Trouble's not what I sell, Hart. I sell protection. $2 a head, and you can cross." "That's robbery," Eli said flatly. Calder shrugged. "It's business." Before Eli could reply, the sound of horses came from behind. Sheriff Doyle Briggs appeared, his tin star glinting in the sun. His expression was all fake concern. "Well now," the sheriff said, "seems we got a misunderstanding. Pay the man, Eli. It'll save you grief." Eli looked from the sheriff to Calder, realization settling in. The law was in Calder's pocket. He tightened his grip on the reins. "We're not paying." Calder's smile vanished. A poor choice. He turned his horse and rode off, his men following. But Eli knew this wasn't over. They crossed the bridge, watered the herd, and made camp beyond the ridge. Everyone was quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The attack came deep in the night. It started with the cattle's terrified lowing, then came the thunder of hooves. Gunfire tore through the darkness. Bullets whined through the tents. Flames erupted from the chuck wagon as a torch landed square in the supplies. The fire lit the night in orange chaos. The herd panicked and stampeded through camp. "Hold your ground!" Eli yelled. But Tommy Birch didn't listen. The boy ran toward the herd, trying to turn them, shouting at the top of his lungs. A single shot cracked. Tommy fell. Eli froze, the world narrowing to that one sound. Maeve's scream cut through the noise as a wagon wheel toppled toward Nell Carter. Without hesitation, Maeve shoved Nell out of the way, the heavy wheel catching her shoulder and sending her sprawling. Something broke inside Eli Hart. The guilt, the restraint, the years of silence, all of it burned away. "Hector! Jeb! On me!" he shouted. They returned fire, their shots precise and deadly. The raiders, realizing they'd lost the element of surprise, pulled back into the darkness. When the shooting stopped, the camp was in ruins. Half the herd was gone. The chuck wagon was a heap of ashes. Maeve clutched her injured shoulder. Nell was bleeding from her leg. And Tommy Birch was dead. Lou Tate knelt beside the boy, his face twisted with grief. The sun rose on a broken camp, and in the cold light of dawn, they heard wagons approaching. Agnes Pike sat on the lead seat, a rifle across her lap. Behind her rode a handful of townsfolk, men and women with grim faces and old guns. She looked at the wreckage, at the boy's still form. Her eyes softened for a heartbeat, then hardened again. "What he did to that boy," she said quietly, "isn't just your fight anymore, Eli. He's declared war on all of us." The time for silence was over. They buried Tommy Birch on a quiet hill overlooking the creek. The wind whispered through the dry grass as Hector Ruiz hammered together a small wooden cross from the charred remains of the chuck wagon. Lou Tate placed the boy's hat on top and stepped back, his jaw trembling. No one spoke. The silence was heavier than grief. It was the weight of a promise. When they rode back towards Sagebrush Ford, they didn't return to the main street, but to an old granary owned by a widow named Maribel Sloan. She opened her doors without question. The smell of dust and old grain hung in the air, but it was safe, and for now, that was enough. Inside, Maeve Roar moved like a woman possessed. Her injured shoulder hung heavy, but she worked through the pain. She boiled water, tore flour sacks into bandages, and turned the granary into a place of order. She cooked with what little they had left: wild onions, a pair of prairie birds Hector had caught, and a few donated supplies from the townsfolk. Soon, the scent of her stew filled the air, pushing back the smell of smoke and sorrow. She wasn't just cooking food. She was rebuilding the spirit that had been crushed in the fire. That evening, the survivors gathered in the town's small chapel. The air inside was cool, lit by the flicker of a few oil lamps. Agnes Pike stood at the front, her face carved with determination. "Vance Calder's had his boot on our necks for too long," she said. "He's bled this town dry. He owns the sheriff, the water, and half the men with guns in this valley. But what he did to that boy, what he did to Eli's drive, crossed a line." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. These were farmers, blacksmiths, and saloon girls, people with no reason to fight, except that they were tired of being afraid. Eli sat at the back, his head bowed. Every word felt like another stone pressing down on him. He had started this. His desperation had brought this storm to their door. He had lost men before, but Tommy's death had reopened an old wound, the one he had carried since the Cheyenne camp. He stood and slipped outside into the night, the air cold against his face. He leaned against the chapel wall, his breath shallow. For the first time in years, Eli Hart was afraid, not of Calder, but of himself, of the choices that lay ahead. Maeve found him there, half in shadow. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood beside him, close enough for him to feel her warmth. "They're going to fight," he said quietly. "Agnes, Hector, all of them, and they'll die for it, because of me." "They're fighting for themselves," she said softly. "You didn't start this, Eli. Calder did. You were just the spark that lit the fire." He turned to her, his eyes dark. "I can't lose anyone else. I can't watch more good people die because of me." She looked up at him, her voice trembling just enough to betray her fear. "You don't know what you're doing," she whispered. She wasn't warning him about Calder. She was warning him about the cost of his heart, the way he was ready to throw his life away to protect everyone else. Eli's gaze held hers. For a long moment, the wind and the night faded away, leaving only the two of them. Two people who had both lived too long behind their walls. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said quietly. His hand found hers. "I know you're mine." It wasn't a claim of possession. It was a declaration of faith, of belonging, a promise forged in blood and dust. And then he kissed her. The kiss was fierce and trembling, filled with all the things neither had been able to say. It tasted of smoke and salt and the sharp edge of survival. When they pulled apart, their breath came quick, and the fear between them had changed. It had become resolve. They went back inside together. The argument in the chapel had reached a boiling point, but when Eli stepped forward, the room fell silent. "Agnes is right," he said. "We can't wait for help. Calder will come for us again, so we choose the ground. We set the trap." He explained the plan. How they'd lure Calder into Boxed Wash, a narrow canyon north of town, where the walls were high and escape was nearly impossible. Agnes and Hector would spread the word in town that Eli was trying to sneak his remaining cattle north under cover of night. Calder's spies would carry the bait straight to him. They would be waiting. 2 nights later, under a cold moon, the people of Sagebrush Ford prepared for war. Jeb Crow and Nell Carter took positions high on the canyon rim. Lou Tate and the farmers built a barricade of fallen logs to block the exit. Eli moved quietly among them, checking rifles, giving orders. Down near the canyon entrance, Maeve waited with a few of the older men. She had turned the ground into a trap, slick clay covered with a fine layer of dust, invisible until it was too late. She checked her whistle, her rifle, her courage. When Eli found her, she was wrapping her shoulder tight. He reached out, his rough hand brushing hers. "Be safe," he murmured. "You too," she said, trying to sound steady. Then, with a faint smile, "Don't you dare get yourself killed, Eli Hart. I'm not cleaning up that mess." The first riders appeared at dawn, Calder's men, nearly 20 of them. Behind them came Sheriff Briggs and his deputies, ready to watch from the sidelines. Calder rode at the front, his black stallion tossing its head. His face was confident, cruel. He thought he was hunting wounded prey. Eli waited until every last man was inside the canyon. Then he fired the signal shot. The echo rolled like thunder, and the world exploded. Jeb and Nell opened fire from above, their rifles spitting flame. Lou Tate's men joined in from the other side, the canyon turning into a storm of lead and smoke. Horses screamed, men shouted. Calder's men tried to retreat, but when they reached the entrance, their mounts slipped in the clay. Maeve had soaked. Riders went down hard, tumbling into chaos. For a moment, it worked perfectly, until new gunfire erupted from behind. Sheriff Briggs had looped around the back ridge. His men's bullets tore through the high ground. Nell cried out, falling against the rocks. A landslide pinned Jeb's leg. Maeve saw it all from below. Without hesitation, she dropped her rifle and ran into the open, climbing toward Jeb. Bullets struck the dirt around her, slicing through her shirt and grazing her side, but she didn't stop. She reached Jeb and pushed the rock off his trapped leg. Eli saw her fall. He saw the blood. And the soldier inside him came alive. He grabbed a pouch from his belt, lit it, and hurled it down into the canyon. Thick, choking smoke filled the air, blinding everyone inside. He and Hector slid down the cliff into the haze. Through the smoke, he found Calder. They crashed together, fists flying, a brutal dance of fury and exhaustion. Calder swung wild. Eli struck back with cold precision. When it ended, Calder was in the dirt, bloodied and beaten, the fight gone from his eyes. The battle was over. The silence that followed was broken only by coughing and the low moans of the wounded. Eli turned and saw Maeve slumped against the rocks, her face pale. He ran to her, calling her name. Hector was already there, pressing cloth to the wound. "She's alive," Hector said, "but she's hurt bad." Quote, they carried her back to town through the night. The chapel became their hospital. Leigh Ames, the town nurse, worked in calm silence as Eli held Maeve's hand and prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. When the bullet was out and the bandages clean, Leahy looked at him. "She'll live," she said simply. Outside, the town was changing. Agnes Pike and the townsfolk held a meeting right in the street. They threw Sheriff Briggs out, stripped his badge, and swore their own law into being. When the federal marshal finally arrived days later, he found Sagebrush Ford stronger than it had ever been. Calder was gone, locked in irons and bound for Cheyenne. His men were scattered, his power broken. Eli stayed by Maeve's side through every sleepless night until the color returned to her cheeks. When she finally woke, her voice was weak but steady. "You look terrible," she murmured. He laughed softly, his eyes wet. "You should see the other guy weeks past." The town began to rebuild. At Hart's Draw, a new kitchen rose from the ashes of the old. Hector laid the foundation from stone, and Lou Tate, now Maeve's unlikely apprentice, learned to bake bread and brew coffee that could make a man believe in life again. One quiet afternoon, Eli stood in the half-finished kitchen, watching Maeve knead dough. She moved slowly, still healing, but the light in her eyes was strong. He stepped beside her, dusted in flour and sun, and said quietly, "I was hoping you'd stay. Not just for the winter. For good." She looked at him, her moss-green eyes softening. "All right, Eli Hart," she said, smiling. She leaned up and kissed him, warm and sure. Then she tapped the knife at her belt and added, "But I'm keeping this." It's still the West. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the light touched everything with gold. The ranch was alive again. Smoke rising from the chimney, laughter from the corral, the smell of fresh bread